There. Is this better?
Significantly.
Cool.
Hello there.
Hi, greetings.
Yeah, how you doing? Thanks for coming on.
Absolutely. Oh, my hair is terrible.
All right, hold on. Just changing the stream title. Could you introduce yourself to the chat?
Yeah, I'm Garrison Davis. I am a journalist in Portland. On Twitter, I go by @HungryBowtie. And I've been out covering Portland protests for, these recent stuff since, May 27th.
Gotcha. Okay. You've got the pitch here. Open up. Hit me up with it. How's your experiences been over the past, I guess, couple of months now at this point? Or, yeah, you said about 2.5 months. How's it been? How's it been going?
We've seen a lot of different kind of stages of protest here. I mean, we had the first week where, I would accurately describe, at least one of the nights was like a full-on riot when you had people going through, smashing all the luxury shops in downtown.
Mm-hmm.
That's when we saw, that's when we saw first tear gas used, all that kind of stuff. But, ever since that was really only rioting was the first night, which is, funny why everyone describes Portland now. It's like endless rioting. Well, no, it's really been only one night's riots, and that was in May.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so we had that first week where had huge crowds, very strong police presence, trying to suppress the crowds. And then the police got in trouble because they used so much tear gas in the streets of Portland that they got their tear gas restricted. But yeah, the first week.
Who restricted their tear gas? Who was the authority? Was it the police chief?
The federal government.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So our mayor Ted Wheeler is also the police commissioner.
Mm-hmm. Wait, that seems like a conflict of interest.
It does, doesn't it? Yeah. So yeah, Ted Wheeler, who got tear gas a few days ago by the feds, himself was responsible for so much tear gas that the federal government had to tell Portland police to stop. So that's the little bit of irony there.
He should show up to more protests. I think he had a good thing going on there. When he showed up and he got gassed like right afterwards, he was building up to a pretty good streak, but I bet he won't.
Yeah, I think that's the best his PR has ever been. But even still, everyone in Portland knows it's disingenuous because literally a week previously he was tear gassing like a residential neighborhood. So because he's in charge of the Portland Police Bureau, he can get them to stop using tear gas, and yet he refuses. And he himself talked about how it's so indiscriminate and it's so unnecessary, but he still continues to do it. I mean, I've been gassed by Portland police 2 days ago. It was most recently.
Huh. Yeah. How does getting tear gassed feel? How you doing right now? How your tear ducts?
Oh, my lungs are ruined for life. Oh, it's terrible. I mean, I think Portland has.
I mean, really? I don't know. Is that true? I don't know.
Oh no, yeah. Like Portland has had the most tear gas used in this city than possibly any other city in the history of the world. Like we have, every night, multiple city blocks are just engulfed in gas. You can't see through. Like the federal. We can talk more about this later. But the federal courthouse, where most of the protests have been happening the past 2 weeks, the first 7 floors of the courthouse, you cannot work inside them. You are not allowed to go in them because they're just ruined with tear gas. Because the feds keep deploying tear gas in the courtyard, and it keeps getting wafted into the building, and people can't work in the first 7 floors of this courthouse just by the insane amount of tear gas just living in that building now.
Yeah, how long does that shit linger? Like, what are the long-term effects of this excessive tear gas usage?
Yeah, so when you're first kind of tear gassed, it's just like a kind of a spicy punch to the face. Then kind of your lungs close up. Then your eyes are going to start to sting. They're going to start to close shut. Then eventually you're just not going to be able to breathe because your lungs are trying to stop you from inhaling all this poison. So since mid-June, a lot of people have gotten gas masks. I have multiple gas masks now, but I mean I have to replace the filters about once a week because just how much
they get clogged up that quickly.
Yeah, they get clogged up that quickly. I have a new gas mask coming in today because even the mask itself is just too soaked in gas. I'm gonna put it on, I just start coughing because it's just been living in gas for so long.
How much do they cost?
It depends. I mean, I'm getting like $100 one that's like a full face one that includes like a shield for the eyes, so that if I get hit by a rubber bullet, my brain's not going to explode.
Mhm.
And I also have a ballistic helmet now. I'm getting some vests because we see a lot of federal officers with M4s walking around. Um, federal officers have pulled their sidearms multiple times on the crowd. So I mean, the next escalation of violence, we can talk about this more when we get to like the get how the stuff started. But like the next escalation of violence in Portland is live ammunition being used on a crowd of people. That's really the one thing we haven't seen yet. That it's the only next step because we've seen everything else.
Gotcha. Yeah. Wait. So at this moment, there's been no use of live ammunition because I feel like I've seen some.
Correct.
I've seen clips of cops threatening that as well. I don't know if this came out of
Yeah.
Portland. There was that clip that went pretty viral of the feds abducting some protester and saying, "If you follow us, if you follow our vehicle, we'll fire at you," which I assumed was a threat to
Yeah.
use live ammunition.
Well,
Because
yeah.
rubber bullets won't do much against a car, to my knowledge.
Yeah, I mean, they've been threatening live ammunition. They just haven't used it yet. I mean, sidearms have been pulled and pointed at the crowd. I mean, there's multiple people walking around with assault rifles, like federal officers with assault rifles walking around. So like, they have the means to do this. It's just we haven't got to the point where they've used it yet. But that's just the next step. So it could, we're prepared like every day. That it could be the day that live ammunition is used on a crowd of 1,000 teenagers. That's the only thing that needs to happen. And then yeah, it's the last step.
Yeah, how do you feel about the recent judge order to prevent the police from engaging in any violence or even arrests against journalists and peaceful onlookers? I guess you would be protected by that provision as well.
So I can kind of tie this into like back in June. So after they got their tear gas restricted, they couldn't use tear gas unless they declared a riot. Unless they declared it a riot. So of course they just declared riots more often when people weren't rioting.
Right, right.
But
Of course.
they did use
That's the
less
problem.
gas.
I just want to say that's the issue with deferring any of these improvements to police discretion. When you say, okay, listen, we're not going to take your gun away. You can only use it in threat level 8 situations.
Yeah.
And suddenly the
Then
number of
everything's at
threat
that-
level 8
everything's at 8.
situations, it skyrockets
Yeah.
suddenly.
Yeah. 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 So now people bouncing on a mattress literally got declared a riot. People were outside of a police union building and they brought a mattress out and started bouncing on it, and the police declared a riot. So yeah, that's kind of what happens. And also, the police broke their own window that night. This is really funny. It's terrible because I mean they use tons of gas in residential neighborhoods. But someone was like live streaming on their phone, and police walked to them, slapped their phone out of their hand. The phone flew and broke a window in the police building. Then they declared a riot because a window was broken.
Do you think it would be possible? Well, I'm sure it'd be possible. Do you think it would be better if the declaration of a riot was not done by the police, but rather
Yes.
done by a judge? Who,
Yes.
who's sort of like you can call a judge to get like a quick warrant if you think you have like immediate
Yeah.
probable cause for that. I think that would probably be a good way of separating the incentives.
There could be a third party there, either in person or watching on streams, that gets the jurisdiction to do that. Because I mean, I've seen federal judges at protests tear gassed as well, and I think they'd be less inclined to declare riots because I think the judge was there at that fake window breaking riot, and then had to experience all that stuff.
I would
Yeah.
not be in those fucking. If I was a judge, I would not be anywhere fucking near police during in this political climate. I feel like judges are
Yeah, no.
generally a lot more on our side than because to be a judge, like it's a very
Yeah.
honored, hallowed profession. You have to be a lawyer, and then you spend 80 trillion years, practicing, and eventually maybe you get appointed. And usually these people are a lot more sensible. But the cops, especially from what I've seen in Portland, especially with the federal police, who have even less, limitations placed on their behavior, these people are just like sort of dumb thugs. Yeah.
The most amount of assistance the protesters and journalists have had is from the federal judicial system, which we can talk about now, because I mean they helped with like the tear gas thing for the Portland police, and then like a week later, the Portland police arrested a local journalist named Corielia, and they charged him with multiple felonies.
Mhm.
There was a felony assaulting an officer, felony rioting, and I think a few others, which of course he did not do. This journalist was just tackled by 5 police officers and arrested, and then was charged with these things, just to kind of scare the other press away. Be like, hey, if you're gonna film police like this, we can tackle you and charge you with felonies, and then your life's going to be ruined for years or months.
But now,
Of course,
you
it's not
have
going to get convicted.
these protections that have been
Yes.
granted to
So
you.
yes. So after this happened, we got protections from the federal judicial system for journalists, saying that the Portland police cannot do targeted arrests. They cannot they cannot arrest a journalist for not dispersing an area. So it's like something the police will do is like they'll declare an area closed to say like this street to this street is closed, or I've heard them say downtown is closed, like all of downtown is closed. And then if you're in downtown, then they can just arrest you because you're in a closed off area of the
The
city.
fuck does that mean?
So
Downtown? What is? I
yeah,
don't. Yeah, I
it's
don't
just
think
like
like this
downtown
starts
Portland,
on like a
all of
street.
downtown Portland. No, yeah, all of downtown Portland is just closed because of rioting.
Imagine you hear like you're in the middle of downtown Portland, like you're like a mile in all directions is downtown.
Yeah,
You get the fucking emergency alert in your phone. You're like,
yeah,
oh shit, like just fucking sprint to the nearest
yeah.
border of downtown you can. Fuck.
Yeah, we do see that happen. I mean, that's just how we've seen people pulled into unmarked vans who are not even protesters, just people that happen to be wearing black clothing and be down and that are downtown, and they get taken by these secret police. I mean, we've seen stuff like that happen. If you're in this area, you can just be taken and subjected to whatever you want. I mean, it's Portland, so we have tons of food carts. Dozens of food carts have been tear gassed because it's just so many food carts are now just little tear gas pods.
Just flavoring.
Astounding.
Just
yeah. I mean,
give it a nice spice.
We can talk more about food in a second. This ties into something really cool about the courthouse. But yeah, so they put these restrictions in for journalists and also like legal observers. So like the NLG and the ACLU kind of like legal observers as well. So yeah, so I mean that did help at the start a little bit. I mean, a few days ago, the Portland police pushed him to the ground multiple times. And threatened to arrest me for not moving to the sidewalk. When I was in front of like a whole crowd of protesters, and the police were like pushing us back, out of downtown. And they were specifically targeting me as press, saying that I need to move. And I just repeatedly yelled at them about their federal restraining order, because it's actually like a restraining order against press. And every time I did that, they backed off. So it's really interesting, like they're totally willing to arrest me and tackle me as long as I don't know about the restraining order. If I wasn't yelling about that, they would have absolutely arrested me and charged me with terrible crimes.
Yeah.
But because I kept on yelling and filming about the restraining order, I was left alone. I was left alone.
Yeah, that's why you have to know your rights, because they prey on you not knowing your rights.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I was
get away with it. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I was with some other journalists. And there were like kind of smaller journalists who maybe they're just like live streamers. And eventually we got pushed back, so far. And I talked like this to 5 people. I'm like, hey guys, we all have press passes. Let's just walk up to the police line, because if only one of us does this, they're absolutely going to arrest us. They don't actually care about the rules. But if there's 5 of us and we all talk about the restraining order, they're not going to arrest us. And that's what we did. And we got yelled at. Police were very angry. But they didn't arrest us. It changes from move now, move across the street, go back, and then they're like, okay, stay there, and right. So there's that change.
They're rolling their eyes behind the riot shields too, like fuck, these guys knew about. Fuck, we really wanted to beat the shit out of these guys.
They were seething at me because I was the only journalist there, like repeatedly talking about the restraining order, and that was the most anger I've seen in the eyes of like human beings, like directed towards me. They were so
Don't you
upset.
love it when your police get angry when they realize you're familiar with the laws they're supposed to be enforcing?
so seething. Oh man, yeah. I mean, it's good because like as a journalist, like I can't yell at the police when I see the police do terrible acts of violence. Like I can't yell like fuck 12 or whatever, because that's outside like journalistic standards. But this is the first time I've been able to yell at the police in the past 2 months after getting repeatedly beaten up and tear gassed by them. it kind of felt good because I was able to yell something in a journalistic capacity about this
Yeah.
restraining order.
Yeah.
It was a nice kind of refreshing thing.
Yeah, I'm looking at some of these video clips that you've taken on your Twitter. This is an unbelievable amount of tear gas. It's all
Oh,
the
that's
air.
nothing. Oh,
You
that's
can't
that
even
that
you can't even
that
be
that is
outside.
a light that is a light tear gassing compared to what we've seen. You don't like if you're not in Portland, you can't understand how much like entire city blocks have just been filled with gas that you can't see through, like just a walls of
Do
gas.
you think like
And
after
this
this, a bunch of Portland food carts are gonna have to start spicing their food with like pepper spray and tear gas because that's all you motherfuckers are going to taste anymore? Like all your fucking taste buds are gonna be shot after all the protesting, so the only thing you're gonna be able to
yeah,
it'll be like 2038 and you'll be just biting into like a fucking rib roast that's been seasoned with half a can of
yeah.
pepper spray and you'll be crying thinking
Hey,
like, I remember those days. I remember the
so
protests.
we can talk about this later, but there is a street kitchen set up in a park in front of this protest called Riot Ribs that have that give out free barbecue to everyone at the protest. And yeah, the joke is that they're seasoned with tear gas. That's what they do. But yeah, if you go to like the day previous to the
Is it
video that
good?
you're seeing now, oh yeah, it's fine. Well, I mean, it's not actually seasoned with tear gas. Like they
Oh,
try to
okay.
close their
Well,
lids and
okay,
try to keep
okay.
it away.
I don't
It's
actually.
not perfect.
Yeah. You
Yeah,
could
like you
probably
don't want
make
to consume.
something good out of like you probably could. I don't know how worth it would be.
You don't. There's other ways of doing stuff. But if you go to the day previous to the one that's watching now, the tear gas is much worse. I mean, I've had days that's much worse than even the past week.
Yeah.
It's bad. I mean, but the fun thing about that shot is you can see the canisters flying towards me. So that's why I like that one.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Um
so
uh,
Portland police got their journalist stuff restricted. Um, and then the protests kind of started dying down because I mean, police weren't allowed to use their toys as much. I mean, they were still throwing tons of stun grenades. They're still throwing tear gas every once in a while. They're still doing a lot of shooting with impact rounds.
mhm.
But then in July is when the feds showed up, and then this is like kind of like a new stage of the protests.
Yeah. This reminds me of Pathologic. So wait, I'm really sorry. Do you know anything about Pathologic? H
Yeah,
Bomber guy made a video on it.
I'm playing Pathologic right now,
Oh
actually.
shit.
Well, not like
Fuck
right
yeah.
now, right now. Like,
Yeah,
yeah,
no.
but I've been playing it. Yeah,
It's just a really good game. It's just I know
I
it's dumb.
play,
It's one of my favorite games, but like the game is like, you're dealing with a pandemic and an ever escalating series of like hardships befalling a town and shit.
yeah,
And see like Portland, like, okay, well you have COVID, and then you have the police come in, and then the army the federal police are essentially soldiers.
yeah.
The army comes in, and it's like, oh wow, this fucking sucks in real life.
I've had to. I started Pathologic around May, and I had to stop playing it because I'm like, oh crap, I'm living this. I don't have time to deal with this nonsense because I'm actually dealing with it in real life. So I haven't played it in like a month or so because I just don't have the mental capacity for
That's
it.
okay. That's okay,
Because
and we forgive you.
yeah, many apologies. Um, so yeah, in July is when the feds showed up. They showed up a little bit on July 4th. July 4th was like a little battle with the police and feds with because everyone had fireworks. So it was just like a little like exchange of low grade explosives of people shooting fireworks into the police shooting flashbangs and stun grenades into the crowd, tons of tear gas. I mean, that day we saw police drag people into clouds of tear gas to arrest them, which isn't great. Yeah, so that day was rough, but it was also kind of like the first day we saw active resistance against the police because of just the amount of fireworks people had. People got brave enough to be like, oh, we can actually like do something. Like they're gonna tear gas us anyway. We can actually do something. We don't need to just stand around. And we've kind of seen we've seen that mentality go forward ever since. So July 4th was like a big day. The feds showed up. Around July 11th was a massive display of force. My pinned tweet right now is a compilation of all the terrible stuff on July 11th. Massive
Yeah,
display of force.
so
This is when,
really quick,
yeah, this is,
I want to pull this back a little bit.
yeah,
Just a little bit. So, with regards to the violence that you've seen, this feels like a sort of very formal and very much unnecessary question on my part, but the violence has been initiated by the police. This
yeah.
narrative that protesters are inciting or triggering violence is a completely manufactured one. Yes.
yeah, I mean, the we've seen a lot of graffiti,
Just
but
a
I've
lot of
I've
violent graffiti. Yeah.
a lot of according to the DHS statement, there's a lot of violent anarchists doing graffiti, which means if you're doing graffiti, I guess you're now a violent anarchist, which is interesting because graffiti isn't explicitly anarchistic. It's also not violent, and other things like property destruction isn't violence either. And we haven't seen property destruction on private buildings since May. We've seen people throw water bottles at the federal building, but I mean, still, that's not violence. The amount of the amount of people sent to the ER from the police and federal officers is like astounding compared to like no one's been sent to the ER from the protesters. Like they haven't hurt anybody. They're
Well,
not.
no, of course.
There's been
Also,
no
the police
violence
are all
against
fucking
people,
armored. Like you'd have
and
to,
they're all in armor. Yeah,
yeah, you'd have
like
to take a
I saw.
weapon to them to even have a chance at injuring any of them. Look at them. They all look like soldiers.
Like
Um,
they freak out when a water bottle hits them, and they use tons of tears. Like I got hit by a water bottle a few days ago, and I joked with my other journalists. I'm like, oh, okay, I got hit with a water bottle. You know what? I feel the need to tear gas this whole crowd
they are
because a water bottle
giant
hit my too.
pussies. I mean, that's like
Yeah,
we should
they're
just say
cowards.
it. Like they're
They're
huge
cowards. Yeah,
pussies. Yeah, they're mad. It's insane. I cannot imagine these protesters are out here. The president of the United States has declared them terrorists, and has authorized federal force being used against them, and they're standing there. In solidarity with no weapons and no armor, and the soldiers with weapons and
yeah,
tanks behind them are cowering. They're so fragile. It's like the cop, like I feared for my life extent. You know, like anytime a black guy kind of like twitches in front of them, they are so jumpy. It is unbelievable to me.
yeah, yeah. They're terrified of a crowd of teenagers with water bottles and a whole bunch of moms standing in a line. This is the enemy they're fighting.
Yeah, no, I'm cowardly,
Um,
but I stay inside. See, that's my I'm doing my due diligence. I don't want to be tear gassed. I stay inside. That's my I'm not a cop. I shouldn't be a cop, you know? I'm nailing it. I'm holding to my civic responsibility. Oh, the moms thing. You were you
yeah.
there for that?
Oh yeah, I've been there. I was there a lot of times with the moms. Yeah,
Can you give me the
the moms.
deets?
Mom's been great. Yeah, so I'll do like a quick summary of how we kind of escalated to this point, and then that'll explain kind of how the moms happened.
Yeah, sure.
So after the massive display of force on July 11th, they fractured someone's skull because they shot them in the head. They needed skull plates put into their skull.
I saw that.
Facial reconstruction surgery. Yeah, terrible. Um, After that, that's when like the unmarked vans popped up. Like 2 days later, when federal officers started driving around picking up people in these unmarked cars. People not even affiliated with the protest. In some instances. Yeah, so that happened. Then I was the first one to like report about that, and then the Oregon Public Broadcasting wrote a really good article on it, and that article went viral. And then everyone kind of figured out, oh wow, stuff is still happening in Portland, and that's when all the national spotlight kind of got moved over. But around the time all the unmarked vans were happening, Portland got very hopeless. Everyone got really down. The crowd was getting maybe like 200 people a night.
Uh-huh.
People were like losing traction because it was just terrible. You felt like, wow, they're just taking people off the streets. They're doing this massive display of force. It's sending people to the hospital with skull fractures. It's bad. But so like the federal tactics at that point was just to disincentivize people from coming out just by scaring them away. But the thing about using fear as a tactic is that eventually fear is going to turn into anger, and then when you're angry, you want to do something. So about of like a few days after the van thing happened, we saw thousands of people show up in the streets again. Went from having like 200 people on a good night to like having now like 3 to 5,000 people every night, even on weekdays, which is insane.
That's
We've
pretty
had this for like
incredible for active for like not for pro not sorry not riots but like protests which carry a very high severe
yeah,
risk of harm. That's a pretty huge turnout.
yeah. So, I mean, especially these started in May, and we're now getting 3 to 5,000 people every night for the past like 2 weeks. And then a few Fridays ago, a group of like 40 moms kind of showed up. They were kind of in a group, kind of not. They're like, oh, let's see what's happening. I think what happened was like their kids were getting tear gas for months, and they didn't hear about it because their kids don't talk to them. And then the national news finally picked up on what's happening in Portland. Like, oh, my kids have been getting tear gassed. I should go down there and maybe see what's happening. And then these like 40 moms kind of got gassed bad. And then the next day, 300 moms showed up.
Mhm.
And the day after that, 500 moms, and now like 700 moms. So it just keeps growing, and now like they're all wearing the same colors now. And what they do is like the perfect embodiment of like how to use white privilege, because they are literally using their bodies as a shield in between the feds and people of color, in between all like the younger activists. They're getting right on the front lines and are standing facing the feds in this like linked arms. Um, and yeah, they're just using their bodies as just a shield in between the feds and in between the protesters. I mean,
Now,
like they're part of the protest, but like they're just a human shield now.
I have heard from several sources that some of those women may have, in fact, not have actually had children. How do you respond to those allegations?
If they haven't had children themselves, they now have thousands of kids at the riots. They now have tons of riot babies.
You should have been a
Because
politician. That was good. The it reminds me a little bit of that one. Was this in Portland? That one naked lady protester.
yep,
Was that in Portland?
that was in Portland. Yeah,
I think what a lot of people need to recognize here is that when it comes to these protests, the actual material outcomes of anything the protesters are doing are comparably irrelevant. But the whole nation's eyes are on Portland and on Seattle,
yeah,
and what that makes this primarily is an optics game. It's about looking as
yes,
good as you can. So when you get people like you with recordings of overuse of tear gas, of protesters being brutalized, of cops getting angry when they're asked to respect your legal rights, this is good for us. And likewise, some people have made like a big fuss over protesters pulling down fences or whatever. They have their little petty property crimes that they can blow up into a justification for retaliatory violence. But that naked lady, I think, very, very, very smart. Because
yes,
she played a gamble there, and any recording, because there were 1,000 cameras on her, obviously, in that where a naked woman is shot or brutalized by multiple armed men would invariably make them look monstrous. And it's a
yeah,
weaponization of the exact. I'm sorry, I'm rambling
yeah,
here. It's a weaponization of the exact same optics tactics that white nationalists and white supremacists have used for over a century, where it's the protection of the beautiful Godiva, the white woman
mhm,
with the fair hair and the fair skin, against the brutal savages that motivates their radicalization, just turned around. I think it's a brilliant play on her part. I'm so happy to see that used effectively.
yeah. So that was exactly, yeah. It's an optics game, and the more time we get footage of a whole bunch of 40-year-old like liberal mothers getting tear gassed for standing there, is very effective messaging. The times that, and it's also like just an effective tactic. Like the naked woman standing in front, she just scared the federal officers away, because what are they going to do? Are they going to shoot this person with 40 press surrounding them? Like, really? No, of course not. So then the federal officers retreated into their building. So it's very good for like an optics battle, because in case something does happen. But if nothing happens, it's still a very good effective tactic, because then it's going to push the federal officers away because they're aware of the optics. And we saw the same thing happen with moms. I mean, eventually they're going to tear gas them, a few hours later. But for the first few hours, the moms are very effective in keeping the feds, inside their building and not just shooting wildly into the crowd.
Unfortunately, it is very much a product of privilege because we all know that if it had been like a chubby black lady standing naked, like they would have clubbed the shit out of her, and everyone on Twitter, all the right wingers, would have been calling her like a gorilla or something like that. It really is so much about weaponizing privilege. It's insane how important that is. Which is one of the reasons, of course, why it's so important to frame Black Lives Matter as not black versus white, but people of all colors rising up against an unjust institution. In large part, not just because that is the case on its own, but also because, man, white people are way less disposable in our meat machine of a country than black people are, and that position of that advantageous position is incredibly useful in a protesting sense.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a very concise way of putting it. And just the really cool thing about we've seen in Portland now is like the evolving tactics of the protesters learning how to like it's kind of been a crash course about how to resist the state in Portland because we're seeing ever since we got thousands of people back in the streets ever since the feds started just the feds. I mean the Portland police have been helping a little bit, but it's mainly been the feds in July. um, it's just been battling the people of Portland versus these occupying secret police. And I think the important thing is like these aren't police officers. Like these are not police officers, and they're also not even soldiers. That's an important distinction. Is like these are federal agents that are meant to just break human bodies. Like they're not meant for like long-term combat. That isn't what they're trained for. They're trained to disincentivize and destroy human bodies. That is their purpose, and they have no accountability. And they can just do whatever they want. So they're the most dangerous type of like federal officer.
So
Like most of a dangerous type of officer by far.
officially, these are, if I remember correctly, and you can correct me, of course, these are Customs and Border Patrol agents working under the Department of Homeland Security, correct? That's the official administration they're operating under?
Most of them. So yeah, there is like a mix of like at least 3 organizations. So there is some Customs and Border people because Portland is technically a border city because
Right.
from the blah blah blah.
You're within 100
like,
miles
the
of the coast, yeah.
Yeah, this the stupid rule. Yeah. So we have some of BORTAC, which is like the specialized kind of border patrol thing. We have like actual ICE officers. We have regular DHS officers. We also have U.S. Marshals. So we have like 4 or 5 organizations kind of all working together. But yeah, it's a large mix of officers. But like it's important, like these aren't actually soldiers because like soldiers know how to actually like soldiers would be very different in fighting because these people are just for breaking human bodies and destroying urban cities, which soldiers usually aren't trained for. These guys are. These guys are just for destroying urban cities. Like they're not trained to dispel riots. They're not trained to do crowd control. They're trained to hurt people, and that's it. And that's that's what we've seen. That's the tactics they use. So like they're far worse than the regular police bureau. Like Portland is not scared of the police anymore. Like Portland has stood up to the police long enough, and they've stood up to the feds since then. That now like the Portland police are nothing. Like the Portland police are insignificant. And the feds are slowly becoming more insignificant, and they're going to continue to unless they use live ammo because people are getting less scared of them and better at resisting. I mean, we've seen dozens of leaf blowers show up just to blow tear gas back at the courthouse, which has been extremely effective. We've seen a lot of variations on like the Hong Kong tactics used.
Careful what you wish for. The next comes the National Guard. Okay, be careful out there.
No. Here, no, exactly. The only reason why the National Guard will get called down because Kate Brown's in control of it. That's the governor. Is the only reason they could come down is the National Guard could come down to fight the feds because the feds are kind of illegally in Portland.
Well, that's true because the governor does not want the feds in there.
Yes. So if Kate Brown wanted, she could call down the National Guard to actually like arrest these feds. And if these feds don't want to be arrested, they're going to start fighting. And I think this scenario is unlikely, but it is a possibility.
Fucking insane. That would be the most insane shit that has ever happened in the history of the United States. Police protests escalating into the deployment of federal officers that the governor calls the National Guard into fight. That would be Portland would be leveled in the fighting. It would be insane.
Yes. Yeah. Oh yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. So like I doubt this will happen, but this is the first time that this has been kind of on the table. Like this is the first time that this is actually a distinct possibility. And if the federal officers escalate further, I think there's a greater chance that she might do that because she doesn't want them here, and she's in control of the National Guard, and she's in control of like the state troopers. So there could be a lot of people.
Can the National Guard supersede the orders of the president if they're called in by a governor?
We've never been in this situation before. We don't know. This is where the law gets kind of iffy because we've never been in this exact scenario. That we're kind of unsure of who has the legal right. That's why it kind of is going to turn more into a firefight because, I mean, you could make like, a states' rights argument. You can also, you can make an argument that like the federal government's trying to like take control because this stuff's going to chaos, which it is going to chaos, but from the feds. But yeah, I watched a video talking about like the legality of what's going on, and it's kind of iffy. We've never been in this exact scenario. There's nothing really on the books saying, black and white. Yeah, this is how it is. Well, if it happens, we'll find out what
It
it
looks
is,
like the
but we
national
don't
it
really
looks
know
like the
yet.
National Guard is the highest authority of the National Guard is the leadership of each of the 50 states, depending on who calls them. But during national emergencies, the president has superseding authority. So he would have to
Interesting.
declare a national emergency to regain control of the National Guard. But presumably, there's some kind of ultra
Huh.
secret, double super secret national emergency the state could then reverse Uno card with.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that I mean,
I don't
well,
know. It's
I
so bad.
it's very unlikely. It's
Of
unlikely,
course, of
but
course.
we're closer to it being a thing than we've ever have in the history of the country. So
Can you explain something to me? Why is there's so much attention being placed in this on this courthouse in Portland? I've seen so many videos of protesters rattling the gates outside it, of um of tear gas being blown back into it or fired out from it. Why has that become like the nexus of this civil action?
it kind of happened by accident. So the protests have been stationed. The protests started at the Justice Center, which is right next door to the courthouse. The Justice Center is like the central precinct of the Portland Police Bureau. This is and there was they started like an occupying movement on the steps on like May 27th. So like exactly like 2 months ago.
Mhm.
So the protests kind of just got stationed, just like a coincidence at the Justice Center, and people just kept showing up. Um, and then when the feds arrived, they were stationed in the courthouse, which is next door. So when they started shooting out of the courthouse, everyone kind of moved like, oh, we're just center, we're gonna shift over next door to the courthouse because that's where we're getting shot out of now. So that's kind of why stuff has moved over to the courthouse. I mean, it's a terrible target because the feds have so much, like that's where they all live. So that's the place to like shoot from, and everyone's just like right there. But because of just kind of a coincidence, that's just how kind of stuff mapped out geographically. That's kind of where stuff has went down.
Okay,
I
yeah.
mean,
So it wasn't like this big
yeah,
targeted planned direction. It
no,
was just
no, not at
it
all.
sort of happened that way.
It
Uh
it was just an accident. Yeah, yeah.
so to what extent have you seen action done by the far right in Portland? Have you seen like Proud Boys or any communication between these groups? Like to what extent are they present there?
Um, Overall, the amount of people on the right who talk about like resisting, the tyrannical government, who talk about all these kind of things, have been oddly absent. I don't know. I'm not sure what they're so busy with because I feel like this is the kind of thing they've been LARPing about for years. And something tells me they may just be kind of cowards because they haven't showed up to these things. They have stayed away. They don't want to deal with the police using violence. They don't want to deal with tear gas. They have not showed up. We've seen. When I first showed up, I was so prepared for this to happen. I mean, like we got like a random Nazi to show up on like the first night, but and then we haven't seen him since.
Well, they could be there. Maybe you just don't recognize them underneath the
Sure.
visors.
I mean, like I've been tracking all the people. Oh, sure, yes. I mean, Portland police literally employed someone who built a memorial to Hitler in his yard, and he was employed for like 20 years in the Portland Police Bureau. And this was like in 2010. And I mean, the Portland police have consistently worked with the Proud Boys and been in communication with the Proud Boys. It's one of the most corrupt police departments in the country. They're like, yeah,
Yeah,
they're really bad.
how does that happen exactly? I know that your mayor isn't exactly well liked, but I don't the Portland mayor, what's his name again? Forgive me.
Ted Wheeler.
Ted Wheeler. I didn't get the impression this person is like some sort of crypto, you know? I'm surprised there
No, he's
hasn't been
not.
greater action to address this.
He's like the Joe Biden of Portland. He's this like milquetoast liberal who really doesn't want to do much action. He's like, oh, we have to kind of back the boys in blue, kind of sometimes, but also protesting is good. But also tear gas. Oh, I don't like it, but I'm gonna keep using it because we kind of have to, and I'm not gonna do anything. I'm just
So
gonna
he's a
complain about it.
useless piece of shit.
That I'm a journalist, so I can't say those words, but
Okay, yeah. But so
yeah,
do you think there's going
sure.
to be when is he up for re-election? Do you think there's going to be an effort to remove
November.
him?
Yes, yes. There is a candidate that's running against him who is gaining a lot of popularity since Tear Gas Ted became a meme.
What's
Yeah,
what's their name? Do you know?
Sarah. I forget their last name. I'm a bad journalist. Um,
All right, I'm a political commentator, and I don't remember anything unless it's immediately relevant to the discussion.
Sarah
Lanaron.
Inanaron. Oh, that's
Lanaron.
Lanaron. Sure, I can't say that. Yes, but that is the progressive candidate
Oh, it's
opposing Ted
Ianaron.
Wheeler.
Ianaron. There it is.
Inanaron. Yeah. So yeah, she's been attacking him from the left consistently for years. And I think there's a decent chance she'll be elected mayor because of how everyone's gotten so upset at at Ted the past 2 months because how terribly he's handled these protests. I mean, and she's been getting tear gassed months before Ted has. She's been out there fighting with the people of Portland.
Gotcha. So during the
Yeah, so I think
when did you say, when did the rioting begin? When was the day one of rioting?
May 29th was like the I would say the only actual riot. I mean, like
Okay.
riots have been declared, but like that was the day that only rioting was really happening.
So the
Yeah.
so the primary election for the mayorship of Portland was done on May 19th, before shit hit the fan. And at that
We're
time,
in a runoff election. Yeah.
right, at that time, Sarah got like half the votes Ted Wheeler did. But since then, we've had everything going on in Portland, which is, I mean, that maybe that means there will be enough for a turnaround come November 3rd. That would be really, really
There,
good.
there is, yes. It's getting turned into it's getting turned into a runoff election. The campaigns are still going because yeah. So I don't want to get my hopes up because I mean Ted Wheeler is just such a bad mayor in every capacity.
Uh-huh.
But we'll see. We'll see what happens. I mean, it's possible, and I think she would do much more to help the city of Portland against occupying federal force than Ted would. Um, yeah, yeah. We'll see what happens on that front.
Gotcha. Okay. I feel like we've covered pretty well what's happened up until this point. What do you see happening forward from this point?
It's if I told you a specific thing, I'd probably be lying.
That's,
Because
yeah, I
we
know, but general
we're
feelings. What do you hope for? What's the
yeah.
best case here?
The it depends on what you want the best case to be. Because if you want the best case, to be, it's there's a lot of possibilities that could happen. I mean, the feds have no plans on leaving. So I think like militant protests are going to continue to happen for a while because the feds aren't going to back down right now. They want to like show that they're in charge. They want to show that they are kind of in control of the city. So they're not going to leave, and people are going to keep showing up. People are going to keep evolving their tactics. Um, they're gonna, I'm not sure, like the feds have tried so many things with like the fence. They've tried the fence a few times, tried taking down the fence, seeing what happens. Then usually kind of the building gets, plywood torn off of it when the
Mhm.
fence isn't there. When the fence is there, they get repeatedly tear gassed because the gas gets like, it becomes like a vacuum inside and it keeps circling tear gas, which is why it's like now ruining that building. Um, so it's kind of unclear. I mean, the protesters could move to a different location. Like they could start attacking, the local ICE building. They could do more stuff about the Portland Police Bureau. There's a lot of things that they could do that isn't right in front of this courthouse. But I think they're gonna stay here and as long as the feds are. And yeah, they're not gonna leave. But even when the feds do head out, a lot of Portland is really upset at the Portland Police Bureau still, and that is something that still needs to happen. Like they've been defunded by like 25 million, but that's insignificant to the amount of funding that the police bureau has, and a lot of people in Portland are really about abolition right now.
It would be
And
difficult
I
not to be, given the
yeah,
circumstances here. Now, wait,
after getting repeatedly
I
realized,
have to
yeah,
ask, and this is important to me because this is a problem lefties make all the time, where we get really, really hyped up because of how active and how engaged the 10% of the population, that's pretty far left is, and we forget
sure.
that the average citizen is stupid and ignorant and blissful in their ignorance. So do you this shift towards the abolition of the police, against the police, that sort of thing? Do you think this is being represented by a significant portion of the citizenry of Portland, or do you feel that this message still needs time to spread to that group?
I feel like it has grown. 2 weeks ago, I would have said it's more of a kind of like a smaller kind of lefty belief that hasn't really penetrated into like the liberal hegemony in Portland. Now, I would say it I think it's one of the prevailing thought ideas in Portland right now because we had so many, like tens of thousands of liberal wine moms showing up and getting assaulted by law enforcement that we're now having tons of wine moms that are liberals are saying, fuck police, fuck 12, abolition. Like that's what we're hearing everyone saying. And that is the prevailing narrative in Portland right now. And if you're not that, you're kind of you're outside of like the mainstream kind of thought idea at this point. So like yeah, it has the ideas have changed a lot in the past few weeks because of just how many people have been subjected to terrible violence. I mean, we saw like there was a 2-star general out 2 nights ago, resisting these secret police, like wearing his full uniform. We've seen there was like a wall of vets. There was a wall of nurses, wall of teachers, wall of lawyers. We've seen wall of dads, wall of moms. We've just seen so many people from Portland come down here and be like, "Hey, I'm really not a fan of the federal government occupying my city. I'm going to resist them, and in the meantime, I'm also going to learn about how bad the police is." And that's what we've seen. So we've seen it. There's always people trying to trying to make sure that we don't just talk about the feds and also talk about, hey, everything the feds have been doing, the police have also been doing for months, and we need to make sure we keep that in mind. And the police is so corrupt in Portland, and here's all these reasons for why we could change how the police works. We can at least defund them by 50%. We can maybe restart them entirely, like what's being kind of tried in Minneapolis. We've already seen some reforms in Portland, like school resource officers have been removed from Portland public schools, which is a really good thing for lots of the kids here. We've seen like the gang task force get removed in Portland. Of course, we have had a $25 million budget cut, but I think more stuff is going to be on the way. So even when the feds leave, I think people are still going to start protesting the Portland police. They're going to be protesting the police union. So I really don't see these dying down anytime soon at all. I mean, a lot of the journalists here are prepared for this to go into November and even past November. Like this is now a long-term project in Portland. Like this is not like, okay, feds are gone, time to pack up our bags and go home. This is now going to be like a main part of Portland for months to come. Like this is like just what this city is. The city is now just the city that fights the government. And if we don't get what we want, we're going to keep fighting until we get it. That's now what Portland has become. Like Portland's no longer the yuppie hipster coffee town. Portland is now the town where you fight the government.
Yeah.
That's what Portland.
Yeah, November is going to be a referendum, I think, on a lot of ideas, more so than before, I think. The 2016 election, I feel, was confused in a lot of ways. There were a lot of people who voted for Trump for a lot of different reasons, and they were all stupid, of course. I'm not justifying them. But the reasons they voted for Trump, I think, were a little bit more ideologically diverse than the reasons one might vote for Trump now. Now
Sure.
it feels in large part like this is a referendum on COVID-19 and on Black Lives Matter. And right now,
Yeah.
2/3 of this country is supportive of Black Lives Matter. So I'm very, very much hoping that that November will be a referendum on his performance on these two issues above anything else, leaving aside the thousand scandals of his presidency, and that we'll get to see district by district, city by city, which parts of this country are occupied by human beings and which parts of this country are occupied by people who don't have a problem with federal police blackbagging protesters and throwing them into unmarked
Yeah.
vans. And that'll
Yeah.
be,
Like,
and we'll get to see it map by map, which cities, which neighborhoods, which blocks, which ones contain people worth considering fellow Americans. I have two quick questions for you. I know we said we were going to run an hour. Um, the first question is, what will you do if the federal authorities use live ammunition in Portland?
I mean, in the short term, I mean, I've been talking with other people about, whenever I go downtown now, I mean, all of the bulletproof armor is sold out in America, which is not great. But every time you go downtown, you constantly look for cover that can stop bullets. That's just like what your mind automatically does, like without even thinking about it. You're just searching. Okay, yeah, here's something. Here's a concrete thing that's enough to stop bullets. Here's like what's my evacuation plan? Where who can I meet up with? Who do I need to like message first when stuff starts like happening like that's really bad? Because at that point, the main priority is to make sure you protect your life and not get a really cool shot. They say that's not, because I mean you can't report if you're dead. Um, so yeah, that's every time we go downtown now. These things are all on our minds. A fair amount of journalists who have access to bulletproof armor are wearing it every night. I'm seeing a lot more vests out. Um, but yeah, I mean that's just kind of the reality now, is that you're always looking for something that can stop a bullet for cover. You're always mindful of watching where the officers are pointing their guns, where their lasers are. Because there was a few nights ago where they had an M4 with a laser sight that was just like tracking the crowd. And you're like, okay, I'm gonna stay away from that laser sight. So it's it's bad. It's not this right in Portland. People are now grappling with, hey, do I want to live in a fascist police state? And the answer is no. That's why we have so many people out. But I'll be interested to see how much stuff will change when bullets start flying. It's hard to say what will happen.
Well, everyone who is currently defending the federal officers will continue to defend them if they deploy live ammunition.
Yes,
There is not a
absolutely.
single person who is already defending them. They already want you dead, so they won't change their
Yes,
minds on that.
yeah,
But it might be they are a minority. It might be, enough to get some of the more ambivalent people um, over on it.
yeah.
I have one more question about Portland specifically. It's a city I've been to a few times. I love it. Shoot, food trucks, great. It seems to have a very, even before all this, a very politically conflicted atmosphere, a very weird way. There are a lot of very far left people and a lot of very far right people. Um, and the impression that I got is that a lot of the far left people live in the city, and there are a lot of far right people in sort of the adjacent suburbs and rural areas, and the conflict largely stems from the overlap between those two. Um, do you think that's an accurate characterization? And if so, what do you think Portlanders can do to resist the influence of their more right-leaning sort of neighbors?
Yeah, that is kind of what it is. Yeah, Portland itself is, it markets itself as like a very progressive rural town. We've seen it, not we've seen it in the past not live up to those kind of standards, but now we've seen it, go kind of past those standards. Um, but yeah, and all of the kind of like the far right people that come to Portland, usually they don't actually live here. They live in like either like Vancouver, Washington, maybe like Hillsborough, or more like southern or like rural Oregon, and they'll come to agitate. But honestly, I don't think that matters anymore. I think after months of fighting the feds and police, if the Proud Boys show up, I think Portland's not going to care. Like what? Like Portland's gonna be like, what? Like what the fuck are you guys doing? Like what? You're sad, lonely, larping boys. You're not like this. We've seen so much worse. Like we fought off the federal government already. Like they're not scared of Proud Boys at this point, and Proud Boys haven't showed up because they're scared of being here.
Yeah, that's
Um,
the cred you can take. Nobody can ever call you LARPers. You guys over in Portland, you've actually done it.
they've
You've
done it.
done the
Yeah.
thing, All these, wannabe Civil War dipshits can build up the armories in their basements, and then talk about how when the feds finally overstep and then not actually do anything about it. But y'all actually did something about it. So that's
Yeah.
definitely
Well,
a
but
notch in your belt.
one more thing is like a few days ago, it was the first time I saw a large like swath of Boogaloo Boys show up. Boogaloo Boys are like a mix of right leaning people usually that are they're accelerationists that want to like initiate or participate in a civil war.
Mhm.
Some of these are more like libertarian types. Some are actual Nazis. There's like a mix of them. It's hard to kind of pin down them specifically because they're more of like a meme and an aesthetic at this point. But they all want to initiate some type of civil war. That's kind of like the underlying thing. It comes from Civil War II. Electric Boogaloo is where the name comes from.
Mhm.
Um, so the first time I really saw them show up was like a few days ago, and they came up to there was a black bloc group confronted them a little bit, and then they kind of figured out these guys seem kind of harmless. They seem more just like kids in their 20s that are kind of just sad. So they kind of got left alone, and they're talking about how like they're here to resist the feds and help the protesters and do all this stuff. But as soon as the tear gas started flying, they just left just like that. It just vanished, disappeared. It's interesting how all these guys in all their armor and stuff who like, yeah, I'm gonna protect everybody. I'm gonna do this. How as soon as conflict arises, they just kind of book it.
Well,
It's the
that's the
kind of
thing.
shows that
Their rights aren't on the line. That's the difference between right-leaning and left-leaning protesters. When left-leaning
yeah,
when you get Stonewall, you get the civil rights movement, you get this today. When we protest, we're actually fighting materially to prevent either, the removal of our rights or to assert, to have our rights expanded. Whereas when the right-leaning people do their little, civil engagement, these are usually upper middle class white people. They, with
yeah,
the face of, in my mind, the face of like the right leaning protest was that uber wealthy couple. That one city, remember? They pointed the
yeah,
guns at the
yeah. They
BLM
have the guns up.
protesters.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah,
That to me that to me is characteristic of their of their strategy. They have guns in St. Louis. Yeah, they have guns. They pointed them at people. But all they displayed, it wasn't, courage. It was cowardice. It was fragility. And I think that's very, characteristic of their approach towards these issues. I um I really, really appreciate you coming on to speak with me. I think this is a pretty phenomenal conversation. We have the hour block. Would you mind shouting yourself out again and hitting us any final memes if you'd like?
sure. Yeah. You can find most of my stuff, like on ground reporting at Hungry Bowtie on Twitter. Hungary is in food, not the rising fascist country. Um, Hungry Bowtie on Twitter. You can also, I've been on a few other kind of news programs. If you watch NBC, you may have seen my stuff. Yeah, my Twitter is where you could get most of my stuff. Yeah, I have a few projects kind of in the works, so we'll see. There's a few people coming to Portland that like documentary stuff that may be happening with some other journalists and myself. So keep your eyes peeled. Um, but yeah, the shield wall, the phalanx has been fantastic in Portland. That's been a good meme that we're seeing. Riot Ribs, this restaurant that opened up in Portland, like just like this restaurant that gives out free food, has been amazing. Fed 1,000 people for free. Tear gas Ted's also a really good meme. You should share it around whenever people talk about the mayor getting tear gassed. He's the one that started the tear gassing, and his name is Tear Gas Ted. And I will probably leave it with that.
Oh, speaking of protesters putting their necks out on the line, seen Andy No anywhere near the front lines lately?
No, Andy No has done well. What he has been doing though, he's been ripping my videos from Twitter and posting them as his own. That is what he's been doing. And
Ah.
yeah, he hasn't been showing up very much at all, actually. But all his supporters are like, oh, whenever he posts a video, whenever he posts one of my videos, and there's like, oh, great job, Andy, thank you for being out there,
You
putting your
should
life on the line.
You should
report
DMCA that motherfucker. You absolutely
I,
should
I
DMCA that motherfucker.
I am working on a few things they can't talk about.
All right,
So
yeah,
yeah,
no, okay. You
there's
worked hard to
there's
get
stuff in the
those
works.
goddamn clips.
Yeah,
Anyway,
there's stuff in the works.
thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. Have a wonderful day, comrade. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, you as well. All right, bye. Thank you.
Bye. That was a damn good interview.